Okay, so I read the story. Will you help me escape the Shadow Realm now and to save my channel?
And make it home in time for Cat Halloween?
Yeah, that too, I guess.
I am a puppet of my word, MCP.
Okay, so, how am I supposed to get out of here?
Well, Bizarre MCP tricked you into banishing yourself to the Shadow Realm with a 419 scam. I mean, really? A Nigerian prince? Who still falls for that? Are you a Sinnoh grandma or something?
I get it. Everybody makes mistakes.
Sure, but not that mistake. It's literally the oldest trick in the book. It's older than the internet.
Can you just tell me how to get out of here?
I was getting that. So, Bizarre MCP used the 419 scam to trick you into reciting a spell that banished you to the Shadow Realm because apparently you're the world's most gullible idiot.
Can you just...
The spell made the two of you switch places. He to your world and you to the Shadow Realm. That means you need to trick him into reciting a spell to switch you back.
Ah, I see. So all I need to do is write a letter claiming that I'm a Nigerian prince with $11 billion. And
no, that won't work. Bizarre MCP is the opposite of you, so that means he's not a daft moron.
Alright, so what am I supposed to do?
Let me think. Is there anyone else at your place with him?
Let me see. Vincent was going to come over to promote the new book that he's featured in, that Dark Places, Evil Faces book. It's being put out by PS Publishing.
Vincent V Cava? Oh, that's great. We'll just get him to recite a different spell. Once he says the magic words, you'll switch places with the Bizarre MCP. Problem solved.
But how do we contact him? I got no service here in the Shadow Realm.
I do. Who's your provider? AT&T? Oh my god, it's AT&T, isn't it? I'll text Vincent.
Wait, you have Vincent's phone number?
I don't really know how he got into my contacts. We both dated the same hand a while back. Maybe that's how.
Wait, you dated the same... hand? How does that work?
I'm a puppet, MCP. Do you really want details? And sent. Hopefully when he gets the text, he'll recite the spell, and that will be the end of Bizarro MCP.
What do we do now?
It should take a while for him to get that message. The signal is kinda slow when it has to cross through multiple dimensions.
So, what should we do in the meantime?
Wanna read another story from that book?
Yeah, alright. I guess we got time. Abigail Sizemore had been staring through the kitchen window for a long time. So long, her coffee has gone cold. It's a beech tree in the front yard that has absorbed her so. She finds herself mesmerized by its branches, how gracefully they seem to sway side to side like the arms of a wooden giant, dancing against the purple backdrop of dawn. The tree moves with a twisted magnificence, and it looks all alone at the end of her lot like a remnant of some enchanted forest, plucked from the pages of a fairy tale only to be plopped down smack dab in the middle of nowhere, Indiana. Abigail lifts her coffee mug to her mouth and takes an absent-minded sip. The drink's unexpected chill only briefly stirs her from her daydream, and soon enough her thoughts drift off again, off to the place they were before. Off to the place they were before I began the story, off to her older brother Brady, and the day his deep dark shadow cast itself over her head like a wicked specter. Let us join her in that memory. To do so, we must travel back all those years ago to a time before smartphones and social networks, the Arizona Diamondbacks and reality TV. A time when Abigail's older brother was 19 years old and she was only 6. The two siblings had different fathers, both of whom had been long gone for years. Abigail can't recall much about Brady's dad, but she can't recall much about her own father either. They, like most of her early memories, have long since washed away down the river of time. Not this one, though. This memory is different. How vividly she can picture it. It's almost as if her own life had flashed into existence that warm autumn afternoon. Playing in the tall grass which grew in front of her family's 2-story Dutch colonial. with its gremble roof, its brick chimney, and its beige vinyl sidings that so poorly mimicked the appearance of wood. Cotton ball clouds hung weightlessly in the sky, and just across the street, wind gusted through Mr. Gracie's cornfield. It sounded like this. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Abigail can envision her mother's face. A solemn expression she wore as the sheriff's brown and white Crown Vic idled to a stop in front of the family's home. She remembered the sheriff too well. So large he seemed back then, standing well over 6 foot 6 inches, in his hand-stitched black leather cowboy boots that most certainly weren't standard issue. Atop a tuft of gray hair, he wore a white Stetson and concealed nearly half his face, wearing a pair of mirrored aviators. Their teardrop lenses reflected the sun, scattering bronze rays in a dozen different directions. The sheriff stepped off the street and began to blaze a trail through the tall grass on his way up to the porch. He stopped when he spotted young Abigail hiding among the weeds. He smiled, tipped his big white hat in her direction before continuing on. Even at 6, she could sense there had been something terribly forced about his exchange. The sheriff had brought an awful aura with him that day. It rose off his body like a black plume of smoke. It stunk of cheap cologne and cigarettes, of old leather boots and southern comfort, but most of all, it stunk of Brady. He had been missing for 3 days. The sheriff lumbered up to the porch and removed his hat. His hair was a messy knot of silvery twine in the afternoon light. He greeted Abigail's mother with the same forced smile he had used to greet young Abigail. The two conversed in a hushed tone just above a whisper. From the front yard, Abigail could hear nothing of the discussion, only the whoosh, whoosh, whoosh of the warm summer breeze blowing through the cornstalks across the street. But she watched them speak to each other anyway. And as they carried on, she noticed the color drained from her mother's face, and the age lines deepened between her brow. Once the sheriff had finished saying his piece, he withdrew down the steps and started back towards his car. He would not stop to tip his hat to Abigail a second time. Perhaps he knew such a courtesy would have been an empty gesture. It would make sense considering his reason for being there in the first place. Or perhaps he could see a bit of Brady in Abigail's face. And that would make sense too. Abigail's brother had been found, but he would not be coming home. Brady would instead remain in the sheriff's custody until he could be transferred to the county jail. There would be no bail. Monsters seldom receive such luxuries, and Abigail's brother was indeed a monster. One that had just gone on the most violent killing spree Pike County, Indiana, had ever seen. Okay, we're back to the present now. Back to the cold coffee and the purple dawn, back to the beech tree and its hypnotic dance. Abigail leaves her mug on the kitchen counter and shuffles lazily across the linoleum floor until she reaches the porch door. She grabs hold of the brass knob, jerks it open, and just like that, she's standing on the porch. The very same porch her mother had been standing on when the sheriff delivered that awful news 27 years prior. She glances upward. The sky above Old Man Gracie's cornfield will soon begin to redden. Then a deep orange sun will rise over the stalks across the road. The sight is a familiar one to her. She's watched it many times before. Just a few weeks ago, she stood with her husband Mike as the two of them enjoyed the sunrise together. A shallow breath slips from between her lips, and with it a fleeting feeling of loneliness. She wishes Mike was beside her now. Abigail closes her eyes. She can almost feel the weight of his arms draped around her shoulders, almost feel the coarseness of his beard rubbing against her cheek. And for a moment, she isn't alone anymore. Just a moment, though, because as soon as she opens her eyes again, her presence vanishes into the air like a dream. She looks down to find her fingers involuntarily caressing her abdomen. She wishes they could be his. Abigail descends the porch steps one by one so as to not trip. A small voice inside her head is warning her to be careful. Maybe it's her guardian angel. Maybe that tiny voice is me. Whoever that voice belongs to, it cautions her to tread lightly because today, the world is more treacherous than usual. The early morning air is cold. It has teeth, which it uses to nip at her bare shoulders relentlessly. She's wearing a thin pajama top with no bra, flannel bottoms, and a pair of cross trainers with no socks. They're Asics. Not that it matters. For a moment, she briefly considers going back inside the house to throw on a sweatshirt, but decides against it. The cold is of little importance to her. She doesn't know it, but in a few minutes the weather will be the furthest thing from her mind. In fact, she's already running out of fucks to give about it. Her thoughts are taking her off to the past again. We should follow her there. I wouldn't want you to miss this part of the story. The newspapers had dubbed Brady the Pike County Vampire. After his arrest, on account of him devouring the heads of two of his victims, a 7-year-old boy he'd picked up on his way from school the day that he went missing, and an old woman who lived alone just 3 miles down the road from Abigail's house. Brady had been in the process of opening the chest of his third victim, a mentally handicapped gas station attendant named Bert, inside the garage of a pump and save off the side of Route 106, when a customer and a mechanic walked in on the scene and subdued him long enough to call the police. He had bludgeoned the poor man in the head 12 times with the back end of a claw hammer, shattering half of his skull like an eggshell. He then drove the claw end of the hammer again and again into poor Bert's chest in an attempt to pry it open. Bert somehow remained conscious throughout the ordeal, which meant he most likely felt every single heinous thing Abigail's brother had done to him. Brady bit off his penis, too. On a surprising note, that detail wouldn't be mentioned much in media firestorms that followed, but the world was a different place back then. Wilson Phillips was coming off a #1 hit, and the internet came on floppy disks, so you get the point. They say poor Bert was still alive by the time paramedics arrived, though he would expire shortly after, when his heart didn't stop, but exploded in his chest from the trauma of multiple clawhammer blows. His scream could be heard up to 2 miles away. The final tortured cry of a dying, dickless simpleton. Abigail was too young to read the papers at the time, but she would learn later that the press had been calling for Brady's head during the trial. His lawyer tried to use the demented nature of his killings as an excuse to plead insanity, but Brady sabotaged the plan quickly. He boasted about his crimes to a reporter that put a microphone in front of his face and smiled at every camera that pointed in his direction. He laughed when his sins were read off by the prosecuting attorney and spat at the victims' families when he saw them in the courtroom. Brady would be sentenced to death in a trial that couldn't end fast enough. After the judgment came down, Abigail's mother stayed in bed for 3 days. During this time, little Abigail survived on a diet of Fruit Loops and goldfish crackers. Back then, when all this was happening, the weeds that grew in front of her home were as tall as Abigail was. They swallowed her whole. They felt as thick as the Amazon. She could get lost in them. Now, in the present, they reached only as high as her hip. She leaned down and plucked a blade of grass from the earth. Abigail gazes at it in the same dreamy way she gazes at the tree. The moment feels both short and infinite. Eventually, she drops the blade of grass and it flutters casually down before getting lost in the thickest of weeds. Abigail looks back up to the beech tree, studying its strength, sturdy base, and thick branches. Its green, bushy leaves as they wave to and fro. They go whoosh, whoosh, whoosh against the purple sky. And we go whoosh, whoosh, whoosh back into her memories, or whatever kind of sound that would make. After the trial, Brady decides that he wanted nothing to do with Abigail and her mother. He refused visitations and never answered calls from the house. I suppose it's true when they say absence makes the heart grow fonder, because as she aged, Abigail started to long for a relationship between Brady and herself. After all, he was her only brother, even if he was on death row. She thought that maybe, just maybe, she could get to know him before he was gone forever, and so, at the tender age of 10, Abigail tried her hand at writing her brother a letter. This is what it said.
Dear Brady, I'm writing you because I want you to know that I love you. You're my brother, and I'm your sister, and you're very missed here at home. Mama still talks about you every day. She wishes very badly that you would let her see you sometime. I would like to see you too. Brothers and sisters shouldn't be strangers. Love, Abigail.
2 weeks later, when Abigail was fetching the mail, she saw an envelope addressed to her. Postmarked Michigan, Indiana. It had come from Indiana State Prison, where Brady had been incarcerated. Her brother had handwritten her back. She snatched the letter to her chest and hurried inside. Abigail hadn't told her mother that she had written Brady. She had wanted it to be a surprise if he responded, and he had responded, and maybe now she and Brady could finally reconnect, and possibly Mama too. She ran to her room, shut the door behind her, and fastened the lock. Then she jumped in her bed. She tore the envelope open. Inside was a single piece of notebook paper with a short message scribbled on it in pencil. The letter was authentic. She recognized Brady's handwriting instantly. Abigail studied it with hungry eyes. Her brother's words were brief, but to the point. This is what they said.
You little cunt. If I ever get out of here, I'll kill you. Then skull fuck your corpse. Signed, Brady.
Okay, follow me back to the present now. Abigail is already there. We should catch up with her. She's no longer in the front yard. Abigail is following the wooden picket fence that runs along the side of her house. Mike had put it up. Now he's gone. And all she has left is a goddamn fence. She wishes very badly to swap the fence for Mike. She thinks about how she would tear it down with her bare hands, splinters be damned if it meant bringing her husband back from the dead. But alas, life is cruel, and we can't trade fences for loved ones. If we could, it's safe to say the world would know no borders. She thought she knew why he killed himself, but she didn't want to admit it at the time. She's starting to admit it now. Just starting to, though. The idea just seemed too absurd. Abigail hasn't bought into it quite yet. We have time to travel back to the past once again before she does. She won't mind if we leave her for a bit. She won't even notice we're gone. Abigail never told her mother about Brady's letter. She believed it might break her heart if she did. She hadn't been lying when she had said that Mama talked about him every day. In fact, her mother regularly lamented about his detention and often blamed herself for Brady's evil deeds. If only I had been better to him, she would say. If only I hadn't let his father walk out the door. All he needed was a man's hand to guide him. Abigail's mother used this guilt to fuel her fight against the court that had sentenced Brady to death. That didn't matter what it cost her, and it cost her quite a bit, thousands upon thousands of dollars. She was going to push back against the hand of justice and do everything in her power to see her son eventually set free. Even on the eve of Brady's execution, she was on the phone with his attorney, doing whatever she could to delay the lethal injection that was scheduled to take place. Her letters, the phone calls, and especially all of that money would be in vain though, and one warm November evening, 4 years after his notorious murder spree, Abigail's brother would have sodium thipentanol, then pancuronium bromide, and finally potassium chloride injected into his bloodstream. He would die painlessly. Now, Brady may be long dead, but here in the present, Abigail is very much alive. She's standing in the backyard now, staring at the garden shed. It's not much to look at, honestly. It's just your average run-of-the-mill, all-weather garden shed. Probably purchased at Lowe's, or Home Depot, or in Orchard Supply Hardware. Doesn't matter where. Its origin isn't pertinent to this story. What is pertinent is what's in that shed. Or at least, what Abigail hopes is in it. She steps carefully toward it. No longer is her mind swimming in a dreamlike wonder. No, Abigail's focus is sharp as a tack, despite the old memories that are soaring through her consciousness. We won't visit those memories quite yet. We'll stay with her just a little while longer. She opens the door of the shed and steps inside. Darkness swallows her. The air is stale. It smells of mildew and gasoline. Her hand searches clumsily for a chain hanging down from the ceiling, and after a few frustrating moments, her fingers finally locate it, and she gives the chain a tug. A little light above her head flickers on, replacing the darkness with a dim yellow glow. She glances around her. The shed hasn't been straightened up in a very long time. Mike was never the neatest guy, and the garden shed had been his domain. She bumbles and fumbles her way around, stepping over rusty lawnmowers and neglected weed whackers, waiting for her eyes to adjust to the light. It takes longer than she expected to find what she came looking for, but eventually she sees it leaning inconspicuously in the corner. Hiding behind 2 garden hoses, a rake, and a pair of pruning shears, the handle of an axe. Okay, we can go visit those memories now. The funeral director suggested to Abigail's mother that cremation would be the best option for Brady. One reason for this suggestion was his notorious reputation. There's a good chance that Brady's grave could be desecrated if someone were to find out where he was buried. Besides, no cemetery within 100 miles wanted to house his wretched corpse anyway, and so Mama asked him for a catalog so she could pick out a decorative urn. The funeral director, however, had another idea. 6 months prior, he had invested in a company called EcoUrn. Now, the business sold biodegradable urns that used your loved one's ashes to help give sustenance to the seedling of a tree that you could plant and grow. Death begets life, or something of that nature, was the company's tagline. Not that it matters. What does matter is that the funeral director pitched EcoUrn to Abigail's mother, and the idea struck a chord with her. She purchased the EcoUrn and planted the seedling of a beech tree in the front yard of their home. And by the spring, a tiny sapling had sprouted. The American beech has almost the slowest growth rate of trees in the United States, but after a year, the sapling had grown taller than the weeds that Abigail used to play in. After 5 years, it had risen above Mr. Gracie's cornfield, and its branches were sturdy enough to support her weight. A dendrologist is a botanist that studies trees. If one of these scientists had been monitoring the growth of their beech, he or she may have been able to explain to Abigail and her mother just how peculiar its rate of development had been. Unfortunately, dendrologists don't just grow on trees, and since they had no experts to enlighten them on the bizarre phenomena, the strange occurrence went unnoticed. Time passed. Lots and lots. Now, I don't want to bore you with the details, so here's an abridged account. Abigail got older, went to college in Chicago, met Mike, fell in love, graduated school, got married, settled down in the city, and through it all, the tree grew and grew and grew. For those few brief years, she lived away from home. Brady and his shameful past felt as far off and distant as the planetoid Pluto. But here's the thing about Pluto. Every so often, it swings back around and makes itself known to the world again. One day, Abigail received a phone call from the Pike County Sheriff's Office. Old Man Gracie had been tilling his cornfield when he noticed something strange hanging from the beech tree that had been planted in Brady's ashes. The tree was much taller now, 25 feet if it was an inch, and just as thick and as sturdy as ever. It turned out the something Old Man Gracie had seen hanging in the tree was, in fact, someone. Abigail's mother, to be exact. She had done the deed before the sun had even come up. Abigail had spoken to her on the phone just the day before. Everything seemed fine, aside from her mother complaining of the nightmares that she'd been having as of late. After she got the news, Abigail and Mike had headed back to Indiana to handle her mother's affairs. And 7 months later, they still hadn't left. They found that they enjoyed the quiet country life of Pike County, and decided they might even like to raise a family in Abigail's childhood home. This was their plan until Mike's untimely death, of course. It was just a few mornings ago when Abigail found him hanging from a branch of that beech tree, noose around his neck, eyes devoid of life, body devoid of soul. He was swinging back and forth like a pendulum. The cornstalks in Old Man Gracie's field seemed to sway in sync with his body. They went whoosh, 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 together in harmony. Just the day before, he had been complaining of the same nightmares Abigail's mother had been having, someone talking to him in his dreams, whispering awful things into his ear, insisting that he hurt himself. Now, Abigail is having those nightmares too, so there you have it. We're all caught up in the past. It's time to go back to the present again. We'll stay here until the end of the story. Abigail is sitting in the front yard, axe in hand. The sky is crimson red. It looks as though heaven has caught fire. She's focusing on the beech tree. Its branches are still swaying to and fro, still going whoosh, whoosh, whoosh in the morning light. Just the tree, though. The tall grass in the front yard remains still, so are the stalks rising up from Mr. Gracie's cornfield. There's no hint of wind in the air, no breeze, no gust, no gale influencing the tree's branches, yet still it waves its arms as though it has a mind of its own. She knows now why her mother had killed herself. She knows why Mike had done the same. Somehow, Brady's wicked spirit never left this plane of existence. It survives through the tree, where it's been flourishing, building its strength, waiting for just the right time to unleash its vile self on the world again. That time is now. Abigail understands that in this new form, Brady has developed special abilities. He can visit people in their dreams, entrance them, convince them to do terrible things to themselves. That's what Brady has done to her mother and her husband, and that's what he's been attempting to do to her. The wooden behemoth's arms coiled and twisted in the most unnatural of ways. The manner in which they move makes them resemble the tentacles of a massive squid rather than branches of a tree. Its trunk is still firmly rooted to the ground, but an appalling notion flashes through Abigail's mind. It's just an image, really, like glimpses into a what-if scenario Abigail doesn't want to imagine could be possible. The tree's roots pulling themselves free of the earth, slithering across the front yard like some unholy eldritch horror, wrapping themselves around her throat, strangling her, then penetrating her body, raping her corpse, just like Brady had promised to do in his letter. She doesn't know if her brother will ever have that kind of control over his new body. But just the idea is enough to horrify her. The tree is twisting itself into knots now, performing its vulgar dance for Abigail. She is its audience, the yard its theater, and the bleeding sky its backdrop, like the velvet curtain of a stage. Abigail paces cautiously toward the tree. A branch swoops down towards her. She ducks under it, but the branch grazes her right shoulder, and she knows Brady isn't going to wait for her to hang herself. He's going to try to kill her right here and now. Another branch sweeps over her head. She darts forward, and it misses her entirely. Now she's close enough to the tree trunk to reach out and touch it with her hand. Both the tree's attacks have been clumsy, and she realizes that Brady can't control the beach as well as she thought he could. She reasons that his soul has only just begun to manifest itself, and after a quarter-century of dormancy. And like a child learning to walk, it may take time for him to master his new body. It means that she has a chance to end him before he can end her, but she needs to strike while the iron is hot, because there is no telling when that bastard will find his bearings. Abigail grips the axe tight, rears back, then takes a mighty swing. Splinters fly through the air when the edge of the blade buries itself into the trunk. The impact sends a shockwave up Abigail's arm and into her shoulder and neck. The branches above her head shake furiously after the blow. Its leaves flutter like a million green butterflies. It sounds like the tree is hissing When she pulls the axe back, she can see something dark seeping down the base of the trunk. It's red as the sky, and it doesn't ooze like sap. The bitter smell of copper now permeates the air, so thick that she can almost taste it. The tree is bleeding. Abigail swings the axe again, and once more the tree cries out in agony. The blade has sunk deeper this time. She pulls it back and readies herself to swing again, but before she can, a heavy branch swoops down and strikes her thigh. She stumbles, but gathers her footing and collects herself. She isn't hurt. If Brady had more command over the beach, he might have been able to target her head, but still. There's another chance he could get lucky on his next try, so she decides to take away his weapon before he can do any real damage. Abigail hacks away at the lower hanging branches, lopping them off one by one. Each time she takes an arm from the beach, its remaining branches tremble, and she hears the repulsive hiss of its leaves pulsating in pain. The sound gives her pleasure. Blood drains from the stumps where the branches used to be, trickling into scarlet puddles somewhere below the tall grass. Her axe wearing the tree's blood across its steel face like war paint, and her pajamas are smeared with deep red stains. Abigail has hacked off as many as 10 arms before she decides to turn her attention back towards the trunk. She's not scared anymore, but she knows Brady is. She swings the axe repeatedly at the trunk, aiming for the wound that she's opened up earlier. Blisters are forming on the palms of her hands. Her heart is pounding inside her chest. Her lungs are burning from the fatigue, and every time she feels like she needs to stop and take a break, she remembers that her brother had hurt Mike, her mother. Poor, simple Bert, the old woman who lived down the way, a little boy walking home from school one warm summer afternoon. She remembers these people, and it motivates her to swing the axe harder, swinging it faster, kill the bastard once and for all, make him pay for everything he's done. It takes nearly 25 minutes of chopping before she decides the tree is ready to topple. Abigail drops the axe, puts 2 hands against the trunk of the beech, and pushes with every ounce of energy she has. There's a loud crackle in the air as what's left of the wound she had been hacking at begins to bend and snap. The beech tree's leaves flutter furiously as it starts to lean at an unnatural angle. Then it comes crashing down, 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 landing in the road that separates Abigail's yard and Old Man Gracie's cornfield. She watches as the leaves go into its death throes. Its branches writhe across the ground like snakes, blood gushing from the stumps, and leaves flap back and forth as though they've been trying to break free and fly away. After a minute or so, the tree's hiss begins to hush, and its thrashing comes to an end. Brady is gone. This time for good. There's no major feeling of accomplishment that washes over Abigail, only relief that her brother has finally been dealt with. The sun has begun to rise above the cornstalks, and the sky has taken on a light pink hue. Abigail turns and strides slowly towards the house. She stops when she reaches the porch and looks back at the beech tree lying dead in the middle of the road. In a few hours, once business is open, she'll call a service to have the beech tree removed. Someone will make a firewood out of it, or maybe grind it into pulp. She doesn't care as long as she can ensure that Brady never comes back. After she takes care of that, she plans to drive down to the pharmacy to pick up a pregnancy test. Though she is certain, she already knows what it will say. Abigail places a hand on her stomach. Mike may be gone. But it turns out he left something other than the fence, after all. She will not be looking back anymore. She's leaving her memories, all of the good ones, all of the bad ones, in the past where they belong. She has her future to look forward to and prepare for. In about 9 months, there will be a new addition to the family tree. This year's 13-day Halloween countdown is in support of Dark Places, Evil Faces, a new collection brought to you by PS Publishing and features New York Times bestsellers, some of horror's most prolific authors, and Vincent V Cava. Sales of the book Dark Places, Evil Faces goes to the Macmillan Cancer Support. It's a charity based out of the UK that gives aid to people and families suffering from cancer. So, this Halloween, I hope you all enjoy the stories, and I hope we can do some good in the world. Sweet dreams. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta. Just wanted to say thanks so much for listening. You guys are what makes this channel worthwhile. There'll be new horror stories every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday night, as well as gaming live streams every Friday and Sunday night. Please help support on patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, and you can hear me as well as many other creepypasta narrators live 24/7 at SCRM Radio.com. Sweet dreams.